What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Red and Bold Show. It's been a few weeks since we've been here, but we're excited to have you join us today on this Saturday, a Saturday after the 49ers traded Deebo Samuel. Certainly we'll have a lot to say about that. My name is Marc Adams. I am one of your hosts. You can find me at 49ers Camelot, wherever you watch or listen or read or whatever. You can also find me at 49ers Web Zone, where I write usually each week. I'm joined by my co-host, Anthony Robertson of 49ers Cutback. You can find him there wherever you watch or listen. Ant, how's it going?
It's going well, and it's not normal for me to do shows on Sunday when there's no game. So it's kind of interesting.
This is Sunday, isn't it? Okay.
Yeah, here we are on Sunday. And there's, normally it's a reaction show or something like that. And the fact that we're on a Sunday talking 49ers football and there's big news because of Deebo Samuel. And, it was inevitable, right? Like something was going to happen. The way that John Lynch approached it at the combine, you knew that Deebo Samuel was going to get moved. It was just the question, is it going to be a trade that's going to warrant and get the 49ers some draft considerations, or is it going to be a post-June 1 cut that saves them $5.5 million? That was the big question mark. You mentioned it before we went live on the air. I saw the same post from Matthew Berry saying, hey, he's going to be cut in a couple of days. Or, not cut, traded in a couple of days. And it's like, wow, that's interesting. And so when it actually happened, I don't know how you felt, but initially I was just like almost disappointed that Deebo's gone. All the while, it's like a 5th round pick. You kind of have that thought process, but it was something that John Lynch kind of let out of the bag was going to happen. So Deebo on to the move to the Washington Commanders, and now Brandon Aiyuk probably has FOMO because that's where he wanted to be the whole time.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, my first reaction was because I cover the news for 49ers Web Zone every Saturday, which is weird that I thought today was Saturday because I would be doing that. And so I had just a couple of hours earlier written an article based on what Matthew Berry said that Deebo Samuel would be traded in the next couple of days. So I just written that, and a couple of hours later, news breaks that Deebo's gone. My reaction was I felt kind of sad. He's been one of the most popular players on the 49ers since 2019 when he was drafted. And so it's just going to be weird to not have him on the team. Now, there were issues last year where he wasn't his best. Then there was the whole confronting Jake Moody and throat punching Tabor Pepper or whatever it was he did, shoving him. And then he started saying, I'm there's not a problem with me. I'm just not getting the ball. And then against the Rams on a big 3rd down when the game was tied, dropped a pass that may have been a touchdown. The fans started booing him at Levi Stadium. It probably needed to happen, but it still is kind of sad.
It is sad, and you think about these guys and, you kind of have this thought process when you watch teams for a long time. I know I felt this way about a lot of the guys that were with Harbaugh, the Joe Staley's, the Frank Gores. I wanted to see them win a Super Bowl with the San Francisco 49ers. And so when you see those players move on, you're frustrated because you still have that belief like we can win a Super Bowl in San Francisco, but now Deebo's not going to be a part of it. And he was a big part of what this team has looked like under Kyle Shanahan. I mean, there's certain guys that are just, Kyle Shanahan guys right now. Kyle Juszczyk, George Kittle, Fred Warner. These are staples. And Deebo was one of those guys. He kind of gave him an attitude and a certain mentality on offense, a more bully ball mentality that was presented by a wide receiver that hadn't really been seen from the things that Deebo did. And I think you look at that and now you see it's going to be a different day in San Francisco. And, I know a lot of people are saying, hey, what's this offense going to look like? And it could change. Kyle could go a different direction without having a particular tool like Deebo Samuel. So it was a disappointing day. I'm a very big fan of Deebo Samuel. I think it's, it was going to come to a conclusion either this year or next year. I do believe he would have been off this team next year financially. It wouldn't have made sense. But I think it came a year earlier than I was expected. And now Deebo is going to be playing for the Washington Commanders, which I hope we don't. Well, I take it back. I do hope we play them in the playoffs for this part of it. If Dre Greenlaw does re-sign with the 49ers, can we please have a Dre Greenlaw versus Deebo Samuel over the middle confrontation on a pass play? I would love to see something like that. I think that is, big boy on big boy football, and that would be a lot of fun.
That would be interesting. A lot of people in the chat here. Jason Massey says it's sad because he had one of 3 most magical seasons ever by the 49ers, by hard carrying us to the playoffs. Donald Johnson said Deebo isn't the same. Mr. Corey said 5th round pick equals George Kittle, Dre Greenlaw, Talanoa Hufanga. Deebo is washed up. Woo. Lou said, are we seeing Jed pull the reins back on Kyle? We're going to talk about Jed York and maybe some rein pulling here in a little bit. Lots of others in here. Thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. If you have questions, you can type those in, and we'll try and get to those as we go along. So the first question is, and the obvious question, the biggest question is, no one's trying to trade you, right?
Right. As of right now, I don't know. But if John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan took calls on me, I would understand. They take calls on everyone.
Yeah. I don't want you to get shipped to the Texans or something like that, because then our podcast would be a little strange. So true or false, the 49ers are worse today than they were yesterday? That's
absolutely true. I think whenever you lose a playmaker like Deebo Samuel, and like John Lynch said, we're not in the business of letting good football players go. Your team takes a step back. Now, it doesn't mean that 2 weeks from now, when free agency is going, that the 49ers won't either get to the same point or even better, depending on how they're able to address the wide receiver position. But when you're losing a playmaker like Deebo Samuel and you don't have a necessary replacement, it does change your football team. Right now, it's going to change the makeup. And I understand Christian McCaffrey can do some of the Deebo Samuel things, but the 49ers had one real game changer on the offensive side of the ball, was Deebo Samuel, because he was the one guy that could house call any single play that he got. I think the next closest to that's George Kittle. So I do think that this is a day that the 49ers are a little bit worse, but it doesn't mean that that's where they're necessarily going to stay. But it's inevitable that a player like Deebo Samuel, you just can't replace that production with a potential rookie. Like, I know people are saying, oh, we got Jacob Cowing, we got Ricky Pearsall. It's different. It's just a little bit different. And I think at some point, maybe Pearsall will be that guy. I'm hopeful. But I think they'll address this in free agency and probably the draft. And maybe at the end, we might think that they're a little bit better. Different construction of the wide receiver room, but maybe a little bit better.
Like what Bobo said here, he said, I'll never trade Ant, even for Myles Garrett. And then he followed that up by saying, just kidding. Bye, Ant.
Wow. Thanks, Bobo.
Yeah, that hurts.
You had me going up, and then the second comment just completely tore me down. Yeah. Now I'm going to have to hold out for, more money.
I know. Well, it does change that wide receiver room in a huge way. And it's possible that the wide receiver room could change even more, as there are rumors that I think Diana Rossini said teams are calling about Brandon Aiyuk. Mike Silver said the same thing. Ian Rappaport said the same thing yesterday. Now, I think Matt Barrows said that after John Lynch had his press conference and he was asked the question about Brandon Aiyuk having teams call about him, and he said that's what happens when you have really good players. People call on them. And then he went on into this little other part that he talked about, which we'll get to in a minute. But I think it was Matt Barrows that said after this press conference, he went into a different room and met with the local beat reporters. And he was asked, how serious are you considering trading Brandon Aiyuk? And he said, not very. So take that for what it's worth. I don't know if that means, it's probably not going to happen. I have a hard time imagining that a team is going to trade for a receiver with this kind of knee injury. Aiyuk may not be back until later in the season, and when he is back, he's not going to be his 2023 form. He's going to be a shell of himself, at least for 2025. So With that in mind, what do you think about these rumors? Do you think that they could possibly trade him, or are you like, there's no way that they're going to trade him because they would take even a bigger hit in dead cap, I believe. So, what do you think about those rumors?
Yeah, to me, it doesn't make a lot of sense. I was kind of surprised. I'm not surprised that teams call because, this is the time of year where everyone's gauging interest, gauging market value on players, especially not just in case you want to make a move, but, maybe somebody does want to do a salary dump and move on from somebody, or maybe you're trying to find out, exactly where Debo's at. I'm sorry, Brandon Aiyuk is at in his recovery, those types of things. I don't think it makes sense because of the things you brought up. Number one, he's the least valuable that he's been at any time over the last 2 years because of the injury. So nobody's going to be willing to give you what Brandon Aiyuk is actually worth. And then second of all, you do have the big salary cap implications because you did just take on the dead money for Deebo Samuel. And I know when it comes to the life of the contract, it wasn't going to matter. You were going to face this money, however. But that salary cap is going to explode next year. You don't want to incur too much salary cap this year so that you can't build a team that can make a run or at least go to the playoffs and do something. You would like to think the 49ers would still be trying to compete for a championship, which I believe John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan are still trying to do. So for those two's perspective, it doesn't make sense. You're going to get less for Brandon Aiyuk. You're going to have a salary cap problem. And I don't think it makes sense for another football team to trade for a Brandon Aiyuk that you don't really know when you're going to get Aiyuk back, number one. And number two, what is he going to look like as he's trying to get back into shape? Is this a week 5 return with a week 10, him getting back up to speed and playing at 85, 90% of what he will be? Because it's probably going to take longer than that for him to get back to where he was. This one is a little bit more baffling. I thought Deebo made sense. You got a trade request. You got a team that said, we're going to decide that yep, we're going to honor your request and make sense. For Brandon Aiyuk, I don't think it does. His next out, I believe, is before the 2027 season. That would be when it makes sense. Right now, Aiyuk is only accounting for 13.8, I think, 13.6, 13.8 million this year in the salary cap. So, no, it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I agree. I really don't expect to see Brandon Aiyuk moved. I obviously have no insider knowledge. It just doesn't make sense to move on from Deebo and Aiyuk in the same offseason when you want to win a championship and when you're in the salary cap situation that they are with a receiver coming off a major injury. Just doesn't make sense. David Campbell has this is one of the comments that you starred here. Receiver at pick 11 is now on the table. If so, who? And that was where I was going next. Did the odds of the 49ers drafting a receiver at 11 just go up?
Well, I think you would have to say it went up. I don't know how much it went up because, I mean, there's one legit, in my opinion, one legit wide receiver one in this draft. That's not named Travis Hunter because we don't know exactly what Travis Hunter is going to do, but that's a top 3 pick. And that's Tetairoa McMillan out of Arizona. You're talking 6'5", 210 pounds. When he runs, he's probably going to run in the 4.3s. I mean, this is legit big-time wide receiver. You think of Mike Evans, you think of Julio Jones. Like, this is who he is. He's got great body control, great hands. He can really do it all. But what kind of player are you really going to be taking that player at 11? Like, can the 49ers look and say, we took Ricky Pearsall last year. We're going to take Tetairoa McMillan and spend another first-round pick on wide receiver? I'm not sure. I think the problem is this isn't exactly the deep wide receiver draft either. This isn't a lot of really good players. I think there's several talented players, but I don't think there's a top flight number one wide receiver besides probably Travis Hunter and Tetairoa McMillan. You got Luther Burden, you got Matthew Golden, who just ran really fast. Those guys are great. Those guys can do some things for your team. When you're talking about Burden, he's a guy that breaks tackles, but I've heard he might slip into the second round. Some of the things that I've heard. So I don't know that this is the year that you really strike on wide receiver in round 1. I'm not sure the value is there. Now, if they took Tetairoa McMillan, I mean, the guy's a stud. The guy is an absolute stud. But I definitely do think it enhances the potential of 49ers go wide receiver in this draft. I just don't know if it's at 11.
Yeah, that does seem high this year for a wide receiver. So I wouldn't expect them to go that route, but if they do, I'm not going to be blown away because they often do things that I don't expect them to do. So, but I still don't. I don't think that's going to happen. I think I saw that Josh in the chat said we'd need D line more than wide receiver, and I tend to completely agree with that. However, before we get to the draft, we're going to be in free agency, and what are we, like 10 days away from that opening up, something like that. So, is there any chance that they make a trade or sign in free agency a big name receiver? Obviously, people have talked Devontae Adams and different guys like that. We're going to talk Jed York here in a little bit. If the 49ers are trying to stay away from the bigger contracts, then I would say absolutely not on a big name receiver. But with them, trading away Deebo, could they possibly do something like that?
Well, I definitely think it's a possibility. And I know they took on some dead cap, and that's going to change how much, money they have to spend this year. But it doesn't change the fact that they can still sign somebody to a favorable contract that is backloaded. So they're in the mix for everyone that you want to sign. And that's one of the fun things about free agency and the way that the salary cap works is if you structure contracts the right way, you can definitely be in the mix for some guys. I think that there are guys that they would love to have potentially in free agency, but I do think that they're going to be watching every single dollar they spend because they have to bring back key players. So I don't know what a market for Devontae Adams looks like. I don't know if that's $25, $30 million. He's still a guy that can win at a high level, still gets 1,000-yard seasons every single time. Maybe he is too pricey for the 49ers, especially with Brandon Aiyuk coming back at some point. Maybe they want to go with somebody else that's a little bit cheaper. Maybe like a Darius Slayton, a younger guy that's still got a lot of potential, can stretch the field, can play X while Brandon Ayuk's out, and then just fit into your rotation after that. He's still got a lot of talented player that's got a lot of football left in him. I think that there's other guys too. Another guy that I know is interested in coming to San Francisco, and that's Brandon Cooks. And Brandon Cooks, the Commanders were really high on his list because they told him they wanted him. But now with them getting Deebo, Brandon Cooks is looking to come back to the West Coast. I mean, Chargers, Rams, 49ers. That's kind of another player that could potentially be somebody that's a little bit cheaper that you could come in and he could play X, he can play slot, gives you some ability there. Then the 49ers could ultimately wait, and the Rams cut Cooper Kupp, and they could just sit there and say, you know what, let's bring Cooper Kupp up here to San Francisco. We already know what he can do operating out of the slot. And I get it. A lot of people are going to be nervous about a 31-year-old receiver, but he can still do it at a high level. So I think there are options. I do think there's some guys probably mid-level that are a little less expensive that the 49ers might target because they know Aiyuk's going to come back and then address it in the draft as well. But Jawan Jennings, Ricky Pearsall, they're going to be asked to do more this season than they've been asked in any other year. And we'll see if they're up for the task.
Let's see. Chad Kirkman said, is this where the Higgins stuff comes from? I wonder. Yeah, I just think that with the 49ers, anytime there's a big name player that might become available, they're going to be linked to that player. That's just, they check in on everybody. And whenever you hear like a Schefter or Ian Rappaport or somebody like that say Myles Garrett is going to be traded, although they haven't said that yet. But if they were to say something like Myles Garrett's going to be traded or Devontae Adams is going to become available, and they list a few teams that they think they might end up with, they always list the 49ers. And I don't entirely know why that is. Maybe it's just they're so active on the phone. But Mr. Corey said, imagine Devontae Adams winning a Super Bowl at Levi's, but not Deebo. Donald Johnson said, I do believe they will be active this year in free agency, unlike last year. And then Chad Kirkman said, Mayoko says he doesn't think they'll be active. I tell you, I tend to agree with Mayoko on this because I do think that I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I do want to spend some time talking about Jed and some of the things that we've heard. But they always are doing something. So even when there have been times that we've thought they're not gonna be active this year, they are, or they trade up way up to pick Trey Lance. They're always doing things that we don't expect. So when John Lynch spoke on Wednesday, he talked about Brock Purdy, the contract, and he said something that has some fans a little nervous, I would say. He said there's no guarantees a new contract will get done with Brock Purdy. You think that's anything to be concerned about, or is this just GM talk? I mean, there are never guarantees. So I think that people are getting too riled up over something that's not really newsworthy. But what do you think about that?
I think it's contract talk. This is negotiations, and everything you say in every forum is negotiations. That's why when players turn to social media, everyone gets upset. But those are negotiation tactics. These are ploys. And so John Lynch doing that is kind of inferring what we all know, is that they have control over Brock Purdy for 3 more years if they want. He can play out his rookie contract, and then they could franchise tag him. Next year, that would pay him around $41 million. Not exactly the most expensive contract for a quarterback. So I think that we've seen other teams do this. Kirk Cousins had this happen to him in Washington, but I don't think that's what the 49ers want to do. They haven't been franchising players, but it does give them a little bit of a plan when negotiating with Brock Purdy, because all the reports are coming out, and I don't know how true they are, that the 49ers haven't been happy with the way that the recent contracts have went with Nick Bosa and Brandon Aiyuk. And if that is true, then you've got to do everything you can to have leverage over the potential player that you're negotiating with. And everyone wants to operate in good faith, and everyone wants to come to an agreement that both sides can be happy with, but you have to do your job. And I think that's what John Lynch is doing here. He's taking a hard stance, and he's just saying, hey, look, there's no guarantees this thing is going to get done. We want Brock Purdy here as long as we're here. But basically, hey, everyone has to play ball for that to happen. We're not going to get stuck with a contract in albatross that ruins this franchise. And I think that's the smart way to go about it. It's a smart way for a general manager to talk, and I don't think anyone should be worried about it. I do think they're going to get a Brock Purdy deal done, but I think it shows his mindset that, hey, yeah, we're going in there, we're going to negotiate hard, and we're going to get a deal that everyone can be proud of.
Yeah, I think that people may be comparing this to when Jimmy Garoppolo got his contract with the 49ers in, what would that have been, February of 2018. The difference is he was about to become a free agent, and they had to move quickly. Brock Purdy's not a free agent. He's not about to become a free agent. So they're not as pressed for time. Now, I think that the offseason program begins in April sometime. So for me, I think it's really important that they get this done before that happens, simply because I just think that he needs to be working with his receivers, with his offense. Now, we saw him 2 years ago not be able to do that when he was coming off that injury after the 2022 season, and he was rehabbing, and he had no offseason program with his guys until training camp, really, and he had a great season. So maybe he doesn't need it as much as I think that he does, but especially when you factor in Jacob Cowing, Ricky Pearsall, any draft picks that may start practicing at some point, like in May. I think that you want Purdy to be there. So I'm with you. I think that it's going to get done, but I hope that it gets done in time for him to get in a lot of off-season work.
Yeah, and that's his hope too. He said he wants to be there for the whole offseason program. So we know that he's motivated, and that's one of the keys. When you have two motivated sides to get a deal done, you can get it done. And I think Brock does want to get something done. I think Brock still wants to win. So I don't think he's going to press the 49ers for every single dollar. I do think he wants to get paid, positional value and what he deserves. And I think that's he's, rightful to get that money. But I don't think he's going to be crazy about it. And I think that's what I like about this negotiations. I think it's going to work out. They're going to get a deal done. And like you said, I agree with you. I think this deal gets done sooner rather than later, because right now the 49ers, if they went into the offseason with the current roster, would have Tanner Mordecai as the quarterback one out there, probably because I don't know if Brock Purdy would show up to OTAs. I would guess his agent would tell him not to show up to any of the offseason work until they have a new contract. So that would be a little different. And, I'm sure they're going to sign someone in free agency. And John Lynch talked about how that's going to get more creative because they won't have the money to spend after paying Brock Purdy. So they're going to have to pay less at quarterback too. But yeah, I think that they're motivated. I think they'll get it done. I just don't know when.
Now I want to talk about something else that John Lynch said that on Thursday and Friday, and even part of Wednesday, had a lot of people up in arms. So Lynch was asked about the Aiyuk situation, people calling on him, and he said that's what happens when you have a player that's this good. He probably should have stopped talking right there. But Lynch is so honest and transparent that he kept going. And when he did, he mentioned that the 49ers need to get younger. He mentioned the phrase cash spending 3 or 4 times. And so it got a lot of people just kind of riled up that, hey, all right, he answered this question about Aiyuk. And then he, instead of saying, no, we're not going to trade him, went into explaining why they would need to, even though he didn't say that. It was kind of like, we need, here's the call. Here's why people are calling. And, really, we do need to grow younger. We're spending a lot of money, all this. And so it kind of gave a little bit of almost a hint to the fact that they are considering it. Of course, later he said that they're not considering as much. My question for you is, do you believe the rumors? I mean, we've heard you already mentioned it, that there are rumors that the 49ers, and by 49ers, I would probably say Jed York and Parag Marathe, are not happy with some of the contracts that have been given out in recent years, whether it's Deebo Samuel, Nick Bosa, Brandon Aiyuk, contracts like that. So do you think that Jed York is telling them to slow down their spending? And do you think that he really isn't happy with some of the contracts? Could this become a problem? Could it be a situation where, okay, when you're in the Super Bowl, I don't mind you doing this, but when you go 6-11, then we have a problem? Some people are saying this is a sign that Kyle Shanahan's on the hot seat. I still don't agree with that, but it may be getting a little warmer. Where do you see this? Because this, if you read between the lines, there's a lot of content there.
I think it's interesting, that Jed York would get upset now, or Parag Marathe would get upset now, when they're the ones who sign off on the contract, right? I mean, Parag Marathe puts the structure together. He finds out what those numbers are supposed to look like, but nothing goes and gets done without Jed York laying his eyes on it and signing off on it, right? It was John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan going to Jed York and saying, hey, we need a defensive tackle a couple years ago. And Jed York saying, go get the best defensive tackle on the market. And they got Javon Hargrave. So he has been a part of this, right? He's culpable in all the money that's out there and the money they're spending. When John Lynch is talking about the cash and the spending cash, I think he's talking about the restructures, some of the things that they have to do to pay these guys up front, the guaranteed money. So getting younger changes that fact, right? You're not giving out as much. So you can kind of change that fact when you're not signing every single player to extensions. And the 49ers have signed a lot of really good players to extensions, and that's what happens. But I think he's talking about that. I think they got a little extended there. They've got to get younger, and a part of getting younger means you're going to save some money on some of those extensions and some of those contracts. That's why they're not going to have a deal for Aaron Banks. It's why they're not going to have a deal for, Charvarius Ward. There's going to be little points here and there where they get a little bit younger and they save a little bit of money. But yes, there's a thing with Jed York potentially, but he signed off on it. Who's he going to get mad at? Himself? I mean, that's really what he has to do, is look at. And, he is trying to free up a little bit of money. I know he's trying to he's buying a soccer team or a football team on, overseas. That's great. But he's selling off part of his team, and $900 million is a lot of money. And I think he's generating some more cash. I think that they're still going to be a little bit active. And I don't think this is a complete pullback. I think this is just them knowing they extended, and now it's time to try to go back and reshape this roster to save a little bit of money in that way. But also they need to remake this roster anyways. They did it after 2019, right? 2023 was a different roster overall. There's some pillars, but for the most part, it's different. And I think that's what they're expecting now, is to kind of turn it around. They tried to extend it and they couldn't get it done. So now they've got to figure it out.
Yeah, yesterday I did a examining the overreactions from John Lynch's press conference for 49ers Web Zone. And one of the things that I talked about was the Purdy situation, that no need to worry, they're going to get it worked out. The other was, are they trading Aiyuk because of what Lynch said? And I agree with you. I don't think that they're trading him. But the other thing that I wrote was, is Jed York becoming kind of telling them to pull back a little bit on the spending? And that was the one that I said that could be happening. And partly because when John Lynch spoke, he didn't talk about cap numbers. He talked about cash numbers. And that I heard this from some others, and I tend to agree that cash, when he uses the word cash instead of cap, that sounds like something that's coming from above him. And if that's the case, it could be that that Jed York is saying, hey, we need to clean some of this up. Doesn't mean that they're not going to go for it. And that's kind of my next question. Do you think that they're going to be all in this year trying to win the Super Bowl, or do you think that we're going to see a little mini rebuild?
I don't think you can go rebuild at this point. I think you could go retool. But I do think they're going to be highly motivated. I mean, when you look at it, this isn't exactly the time to sit back and say, hey, let's rebuild this roster. It is a time to say, hey, maybe let's retool it, because you've got an opportunity here. You're going to have your quarterback still. He's healthy now. You don't have to worry about any of that. But you are going to have a fourth place schedule that you're going to be playing, a very advantageous schedule that the 49ers could win a lot of football games if they get it right. And a situation where if they do get the number one seed in the playoffs because of this schedule, they might never have to leave Santa Clara all the way through the Super Bowl. And that is something to remember. Like, they could actually have a home game in the Super Bowl. The only two teams we've ever seen do that were the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in 2020 and the Los Angeles Rams in 2021, and both won a Super Bowl. There is a real opportunity there, and I don't know if you can pass it up with a rebuild or a thought of that, and the chance of never having to lose Santa Clara. Could you imagine this team sleeping in their own beds for the entire time that the Super Bowl is going to happen? Distractions go out the window. It's completely different. I just don't think Jed York misses that opportunity to not play at home for the Super Bowl.
Yeah, that would be a huge advantage. I want to talk a little draft. We have a lot of people in the chat that have been talking draft, and so. But before we do, any quick predictions when it comes to free agency?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they're going to target a couple of positions. I think we might be getting a little extended when it comes to offensive line. I don't know if they actually go Drew Dahlman. I think he potentially might get $20 million in the open market. So to me, I don't know if that makes sense anymore. I think that might be a little too expensive. Keep an eye on a guy like Ryan Kelly from the Colts. That could be an opportunity potentially. A very talented guy, and he would definitely come in and stabilize the interior offensive line. But the way the 49ers have operated, who knows if they'll actually spend an O-line. But I do think cornerback is a real option for the 49ers, whether that be someone kind of in the middle tier. But they need to rebuild this cornerback room, and I don't think it can just be through the draft. I think they need a free agent as well. Bring someone in to be with Bernardo Green and Diamond Lenore, and then still draft a couple guys. I think that's probably an area to go with. I've been saying that I love Paulson Adebo from New Orleans. I think he would make a lot of sense. Ball hawk, never had less than 3 interceptions pretty much in every season except one. So he's a guy that makes things happen, and they loved him coming out of Stanford. So I like him a lot. And I also think they could address safety as well in free agency. There's some great safeties in the draft, but how quick are they going to translate? Can they translate as fast as Malik? I don't know. So there could be some guys that maybe you go there, and a guy like Julian Blackmon from the Colts met with the Niners last year. They nearly signed him. Played for Gus Bradley last year. That seems like it's a foregone conclusion that could be a person they bring in and maybe replace Huff, because he could be about $4 million cheaper per season.
Lou in the chat asks for our best guess on the one high price need free agent the 49ers go hard after. Are you thinking Drew Dahlman is that, or do you have somebody else in mind?
I don't think it's Drew Dahlman anymore. I just think he's going to get priced out, and we're seeing the guard numbers go up so high. We're seeing just the interior offensive line getting valued more and more around the league because defensive linemen are getting better. But I don't think you can pay $20 million to a center. I wish we could get Drew Dahlman. And if they signed him, I would be, a big fan of it. But I think you might have to look another direction. And that's a little unsettling because when you look at the draft, it's a little devoid of talent at center. There's a couple of guys that are good. I don't think they're day one starters, and I think that's a little bit nerve-wracking. I still think the 49ers can be active in the edge rush department, depending on Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa, if he gets released. I think that's a potential place. And then, like I talked about, cornerback and safety. I'm not sure they're high-priced guys, though. I think it would have to come in at the right number for the 49ers.
Yeah, I agree with that. I would like to see I'd like to see some more edge help. I'd like to see some defensive line help, but who knows what they're going to do. They're really hard. There were times that the 49ers were easy to predict, and those are not that's not right now. They're difficult, as difficult as I can remember. Let's circle back to pick 11 in the NFL draft. Would you rather they take an offensive tackle, a defensive lineman, or a wide receiver at 11? Well, let's forget about receiver because we already really talked about that. Are you going O-line or defensive line at pick 11?
I would probably go defensive line. I like the offensive linemen that are up there, but you start seeing the numbers that are coming in, and this is one of those years where these aren't bona fide offensive tackles. The arms are coming in a little bit shorter than normal. Will Campbell came in under 33 inches. That's not good. That means he's an interior offensive lineman for almost every team, including the 49ers. And I don't think you take an interior offensive lineman with the first 15 picks. So
yeah,
I don't think you can go there. I do like Kelvin Banks Jr. If he's going to start at left guard or he's going to start at right tackle, I don't mind that pick. I want the first round pick to develop and be able to play. But I think defensive tackle, I think that a guy like Walter Nolan would make a lot of sense for the 49ers at pick 11. If they don't address edge rusher in free agency, I think that would be a really good possibility there. So I like guys like Nick Scorton. I think he's a possibility. James Pierce Jr., the athleticism coming off the outside. Those are all guys that are right there that I really like. One of the guys that I'm a huge fan of, and I'll probably keep saying this the whole time, I don't know if the 49ers would do this, but I love the linebacker Geod Campbell out of Alabama. I think that this dude is the next great linebacker, and I'm getting convicted on him, and I'm sold on him, and I think he's going to go in the top 20 picks now, and the dude's an absolute monster. You look at his characteristics as far as size, speed, weight, everything. He's very close to Fred Warner, except he's more athletic. The wingspan is a little bit bigger. He's just a very fun player. I don't know if he's going to have the instincts of Fred because I've seen Fred do it at the NFL level, but very talented dude. There's some good players at 11 that the 49ers could hit on.
You mentioned a defensive tackle at 11.
Walter
Nolan. Did you mention him because you think that Mason Graham won't be available, or would you take Nolan over Graham?
I wouldn't take Nolan over Graham, but I do think that Graham probably will be a top 10, but I think he is starting to slide a little bit. I think there's going to be a lot of teams that are nervous about the fact that he went to the combine and he weighed 296 pounds. He was listed as a 320-pound player, 6'3", 320, and I think that was part of the reason teams were okay with his athleticism because they felt like he was coming from a bigger player. But now his athleticism is married to a smaller frame. So him and Walter Nolan are actually the same size, 6'3", 296. It's funny, those two guys are the same. Omar Norman Lott, who I really like, he's the same weight. They're all the same height. Like, these guys are all built exactly the same way as far as height, weight. Now, different structure when it comes to body, but they all got good first steps. They can all get after the quarterback. They all play with good balance. So to me, I don't think that there's a huge, I've been saying this for a while, I don't think there's a big drop between Walter Nolan and like Omar Norman Lott in the second round or third round, depending on who grades him. So if Mason Graham fell to 11, I think that would be a great pick for the 49ers. I still think someone takes him, but don't be surprised if you start hearing that Mason Graham is sliding a little bit and getting closer to 10 as we get closer to the draft.
Interesting. When the college football season started last year, Josh Simmons was considered to be the best offensive tackle in the 2025 draft. Then he had a pretty serious injury. Would you take the risk at this point? Sounds like his rehab is coming along really well, but this injury, the 49ers have a history with, whether it's Drake Jackson or Weston Richburg, we could go back to. And for Drake Jackson, he hasn't played since he had that injury. Weston Richburg sustained that injury with the 49ers and never played again. So I saw there's an orthopedic surgeon on X. His name slipped me, but I saw him yesterday post something that can you remind me of the injury? It slipped my. I think you're muted.
Patellar tendon.
Yeah, that's it. So he said that with this injury, only about 50% of the athletes come back, and of those 50%, they're all worse than they were before. So it clearly affects a player. Would you take a chance on Simmons at 11, or do you think that that's just too big of a risk?
I don't think the 49ers are going to take a risk of Josh Simmons at 11. I think the recent history, like you brought up, they even included Mike McGlinchey in that he came back, but he's still dealing with pain to this day. I think that those are just, some things that you don't want to deal with. And I think the 49ers have somewhat been burned by these types of injuries. You look at a potential chronic injury with Javon Kinlaw, but they drafted him at 14. He was in and out of the lineup. That didn't work out. I think that they just can't run the risk of potentially having a pick at 11 be a bust. They haven't had too many first-round picks that have been dynamite picks, and I think they want to hit this one. So they have been going with less upside and going with more consistency. They want guys who played a lot of snaps, guys that have been particularly healthy, more of a can't miss type. They have a higher floor, lower ceiling. And I think that could be the possibility here. I think Josh Simmons is a great player. If he wouldn't have got hurt, he would have been a top 5 pick in this draft. I think he's got the cleanest kick slide of any of the guys here. I think he's going to be one of the better pass protectors, probably the best pass protector of the guys that play offensive tackle in this draft. But I think that injury alone is going to scare the 49ers away from him. If he fell all the way to 43, I think there would be a tremendous amount of value there. And I think they could go ahead and lock him up there because the second round pick, hey, what if you get the left tackle of the future? But at 11, I think it's just too risky.
Yeah, I especially with the recency bias kind of thing. But if Trent Baalke was still here, he would probably trade up to number 1 to pick Josh Simmons. Well, here's an interesting question. Would you be tempted, especially now that Deebo Samuel's gone? We talked about wide receiver, but would you be tempted at 11 to take Tyler Warren?
That's interesting. There's been a lot of conversation about Tyler Warren. I think Matt Barrows and Matt Mayoko both mocked Tyler Warren to the 49ers. I haven't checked updated, but as of right now, I don't think they'd actually met with Tyler Warren, but they've met with Colson Loveland and they met with Harold Jr. I went blank on the name for whatever reason. But anyways, they've got some talented tight ends they've been looking at. I don't think it's a crazy thought process that they would go out of the box. I just did a video about that out of the box potential picks at 11 that aren't offensive line, defensive line. I don't think that's a crazy idea, but what I do think is I'm wondering what value you're going to get from Tyler Warren. And I get it. He can play fullback. He can play tight end. He's a playmaker. But how much is he going to be on the field with George Kittle being the starting tight end? I mean, you're going to go 12 personnel. So you're talking he's on the field, 25 to 30% of the game. What kind of impact is he going to make in that time period? And I get it, but you're re-upping George Kittle. He's probably going to have a couple of games. I like Tyler Warren. I like the talent. I think if you were talking pick 43, you're talking pick 75, for a player that's going to play that amount, it makes sense. I think 11 might be a little too rich for a tight end for the 49ers. I think there's teams that are going to value it. And I think Tyler Warren's a first-round pick. I think he's going to go in the first round. I just don't think the 49ers pull the trigger on tight end at 11, even though, I mean, it's a weapon, and you could go more 12 personnel than you've ever went before. But then in that case, if you're doing that, why do you even have Kyle Juszczyk on the field or on the team? So I think there's some give and take here that they're going to have to decide. Like the player, don't like the pick at 11.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that they're going to go that route. I really believe that they're going to go defense. I think that probably when they brought back Robert Saleh, they made sure that he knew, hey, you're going to have some input. That's not to promise that they're going to pick a defensive star at 11, but I do think that that's what they're going to do. The defense, the offense, even though they lost Trent Williams, they lost Aiyuk, Deebo was up and down, they lost McCaffrey, they still were pretty decent. I mean, they were bad in the red zone, but they moved the ball. And so I don't think the offense is far off. The defense was the problem last year. They couldn't stop the run. They just were bad. And so I think that, maybe some of that was Nick Sorensen, but some of it was, I mean, there were missed tackles. There were players missing assignments. And so I think that Saleh is going to bring back that intensity and maybe get the defense closer to what we're used to. But I think he's going to need some more players to make that happen.
For sure. I think when you look at depth, defensive tackle, you have lack of depth right now. You have Malik Collins, you have Jordan Elliott, but you need a starter next to Malik Collins. I don't think Jordan Elliott should be a starter, should be a rotational piece. Evan Anderson, Kalia Davis, one of them should not be on this roster next year if you're a better football team. You look at linebacker, what's going to happen with Dre Greenlaw? If he comes back, okay, you got him, Fred, D Winters, potentially Jalen Graham and Tatum Bethune. I think you need depth there. Cornerback, the cupboard's bare. It's Renardo Green, Diamond Lenore, and Darrell Luter Jr. You need at least 2 cornerbacks at that position, and I would argue 3 because I haven't seen anything from Darrell Luter Jr. as of right now that makes me think he can be a competent third cornerback for your football team. He hasn't helped on special teams either. Then you look at safety. Hufanga could possibly be gone. Are we comfortable with Jair Brown being a starter? And you're not really getting great play from, a George Odom either. So you need another safety. This defense needs a lot of attention. That's why it was a little surprising when the 49ers were willing to move on from Deebo Samuel, because you wanted to not have to invest as much. Like you said, the offense wasn't that bad. You didn't want to invest as much in offense. You could invest a ton in defense. You could really take a lot of those draft picks and put them all towards the defensive side of the ball. Get younger, get more athletic, get more aggressive. But you don't know if you can do that, and I seen someone bring up in chat potentially going up to get Nick Amenwari, the safety out of South Carolina, who just blew the roof off of the combine a couple days ago with a 43-inch vertical leap, running a 4.38 40 at 6'3", 220 pounds. And he was one of my guys that I loved in the end of the first round. Well, I can tell everyone right now, with those numbers and a RAS score of a perfect 10, he's going to be a top 20 pick now. The dude is an absolute beast. So I don't know. I don't know if the 49ers could get him, but it's interesting. There's a lot of talented dudes out there. But I would say this with Nick Amenwari. I want to throw this out there. You've got Gus Bradley and you've got Robert Saleh, who are the architects, at least part of the architects of the Legion of Boom. This guy is Cam Chancellor with more speed. If you were looking for a guy to fit that role of your defense, Nick Amenwari could be one of those guys. I just don't know if it meets up 11 compared to the value that they're going to have on him.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you think they need a Cam Chancellor, or do you think they need an Earl Thomas? Because they kind of have their Cam Chancellor already, don't they?
Well, here's the interesting part. Because he runs a 4.38 and he's better in coverage, he could actually do it all. He can play both. If they think he's an eraser type safety that can cover the deep third, I think he can cover the deep third. I think he's got really good zone eyes. I think he can cover tight ends in the slot. I think he's a free safety in the NFL. But he's in Cam Chancellor's body. That's the fun part. And the dude's a hitter. I don't think his tackling was as good as it has been, but he's a really good tackler too. The dude's a dynamite talent. He's a first-round guy for sure now. And I think that all it did for me was confirm what I already knew, because I already had him in the first round, but now it put him in the top 20 because I mean, really, he's a freak. And a lot of people question, can he cover the deep third? Well, at 4.38, he can definitely cover the deep third. He can run with anyone in this league.
What did you think about the 49ers bringing on Gus Bradley?
I thought it was a great move. Kyle Shanahan wanted to hire Gus Bradley once before. It was Raheem Morris that didn't work out. Then it was Gus Bradley, and then he went down to coach with Anthony Lynn with the Chargers. And so he already knew what kind of coordinator Gus Bradley was. But here's a confidant for Robert Saleh. They've worked together. They know each other well. And it's a mind that's been in the NFL, understanding what teams are trying to do to this defense. So now you've got two heads that can bounce it off each other. But you also have a plan in place if Robert Saleh ends up moving on next year. Gus Bradley can step into that role as defensive coordinator. Now, remember, Kyle, you do have to interview two other candidates. Let's make sure we do that. Rooney Rule. But he could be that guy that could step in. And I think it would be more seamless. And I think that's what Kyle's trying to do, is build a seamless transition if they need it. We know that, Jed York was willing to pay Robert Saleh a lot of money to stay and come in. So, but I thought it was a great move. I thought it's an upgrade from Brandon Staley and Nick Sorensen last year. This is two guys that worked in step together in the Legion of Boom, understand this defense inside and out. They're going to have a really good idea of how to build this thing together. And let's not forget, Gus Bradley just turned Samuel Womack, who was a guy cut by the 49ers, into a starting corner for the Indianapolis Colts. Something to remember.
Yeah, so maybe he could do that with Darrell Luter Jr. We'll have to see.
Yeah.
Interesting that that there was a change made at the quarterback coach. I think Brian Greasy sounds like he just committed for 3 years, and then it was maybe more of a family decision that he just doesn't want to put in the time to coach. I didn't necessarily like that, because I mean, for him, I definitely respect that and I understand it, but I didn't like it for Brock Purdy, because I feel like he's done a good job with Purdy. Last thing I want to ask is about a backup quarterback. Who you think they might be able to bring in? Because if we look to the 2023 season, if Purdy would have been injured, Sam Darnold was there, and there was confidence that, hey, he could at least get the 49ers a win. Last year, Brandon Allen was awful when he played against Green Bay, and the Pastronaut, he was better, but he didn't really. He's not the kind of quarterback that gives you the confidence that you can win too many games. So I feel like they need to have a better option at backup quarterback. I just don't know what they can do. A 49ers fan in the chat says Aaron Rodgers, but I don't see that happening. But what might they be able to do as for a backup quarterback? Because I don't think that we're ready for Tanner Mordecai to be that guy. West Coast offense mentioned Zach Wilson. I wouldn't hate that. But what are you thinking here? Because they're not going to be able to afford Sam Darnold. I mean, he's going to want to be a starter anyway. So what do you think about the backup quarterback?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things that when Kyle Shanahan decided to bring in Sam Darnold, one of the things he talked about was how they had looked at Sam Darnold in that draft, that they had done a lot of work on Sam Darnold, him and his dad, and they knew who he was, and they were very confident that he could fit the system and be able to run it. So I think it makes a lot of sense for the 49ers, with all the amount of time they put in to the 2021 NFL draft before they drafted Trey Lance. They examined all those quarterbacks. They were looking at Justin Fields. They were looking at Mac Jones. They were looking at Zach Wilson. And so I think that there's a possibility that they could go with one of those guys to fit this system. So it's probably going to be a little less sexy. I love Zach Wilson. I think that he's got a lot of talent. And I think Kyle often thinks that if we get a guy with talent, we can turn him into something he could fit. But they got an interesting thing with Zach Wilson. Robert Saleh was with Zach Wilson in New York. He knows if Zach Wilson can play quarterback or not. Maybe he thinks it's just a disconnect between the system and what was going on or how he was coached. But I think that's going to be something that gets signed off on. There's a couple other names that are going to scare people because they're available. But you've got CJ Beathard available. He's out there. You know, that's a potential that they could bring him in. I wouldn't mind him as like the third quarterback. And then also going by Mullins as well is available as a potential backup. He's been playing for the Minnesota Vikings. But I think one name that I want to hone in on, I'm a little bit more nervous about him potentially coming in after hearing John Lynch say that they can't really spend a lot now because of Brock Purdy's contract, is Joe Flacco. They tried to bring him in a few years ago. It didn't really work out, but it's a veteran presence that could step in and win you some playoff games. So to me, I think Flacco is one of those guys. And then I think it's Zach Wilson, Mac Jones, Justin Fields. Like, those are the type of names I think the 49ers could be interested in. I think Fields is going to end up getting more money, so rule him out. But Zach Wilson, Mac Jones, I think that they could be opportunity for the 49ers to get a young player that could still play at a higher level, that maybe Kyle feels confident in their abilities to run his system.
It's going to be ironic if they brought back Trey Lance. It's not going to happen, but it would be pretty crazy. Let's close this out with this comment from Mr. Corey. It's Drew Dahlman or Ant at center in 2025. I think that we can all live with that. You hope it's Drew Dahlman. Yeah. I wouldn't want to take the hits either. That's all we have, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll be back at some point. We're going through a lot of job type changes, and so we're trying to find a good time to do this show. So we're working on that, but we'll be back at some point, and we'll let you know when we're back. But thanks everybody for joining us. Have a great rest of your weekend, and get ready because, hey, in about 10 days or so, we have, how long is it till free agency? Isn't it like 10 days or
March 10th, I believe, begins 10th. The negotiating period.
All right. So less than 10 days for the excitement of free agency. So get ready for that. It's going to be a lot of fun. We'll see what the 49ers do.